1 second. Good evening. Thank you for joining tonight. We're going to talk about study from the heart. This is entering the Lotus Sutra with your life. I think this is important because all too often we approach our study from an intellectual standpoint, if you will. This isn't bad necessarily. It's just that there's actually another way to study. And I believe that the Lotus Sutra really invites us to approach our study of this text more so than from our intellectual perspective. It invites us to study from the heart. And I believe this because of the imagery that is presented in the Lotus Sutra. Most of the Lotus Sutra is very descriptive images. There are fantastic events happening to such a large degree, size-wise even, that it's almost incomprehensible. And I believe that that is in order to challenge us to suspend our, if you will, our everyday rational approach to life and enter a new plane, a more transcendental experience. And the way that we can best do this is to suspend our rationality. And so this presentation is study from the heart. How do we enter the Lotus Sutra in a different way? As I said, frequently our study is from an intellectual standpoint. We're trying to remember something or trying to learn a new factual piece of information, or even to maybe explore a teaching philosophically. But I believe that we can do it differently, and at times different approaches are called for. So that is my reason for for developing this idea of study from the heart. And I seem to be having a little bit of technical difficulties tonight. So, all right, the first thing is to pick what portion you're going to read. A short portion or maybe an entire chapter in some cases might be appropriate. But I do encourage it to be rather small, and take your time reading this. Really savor the words, savor the descriptions, if you will, savor every aspect of what you're reading, and just enjoy the experience of reading this text. Try to suspend any need that you may have for a rational understanding or an explanation or any of those kinds of things. Just be present with the reading. So when we're talking about the great stupa that appears in the sky above the earth, just place yourself in that moment. What do you think your feelings would be if all of a sudden this giant stupa appears in the sky? It's just hanging there, hovering above the ground. What would you be feeling? I know I would probably be feeling a little bit of fear. I might feel speechless. I might feel awestruck, if you will. I might feel that. Why did it do that? I might feel that that maybe I'm in a dream. I might feel that I may have left this plane of real existence. And I know that I would be challenged on many levels to take in what I'm witnessing, to comprehend it, to try to place this fantastical experience, this phenomena, to try to place that within the realm of my intellectual understanding, in the realm of my personal observation of the way reality should be. It would challenge me on many levels. This kind of approach to really opening ourselves up to what are our experiences? What would you do? What would you feel in that moment, if you're reading a particular portion, if you're reading about the Dragon King's daughter changing into a man, becoming enlightened, and then changing back again, what would you, if you witnessed that event, what would your feelings be? Would you be confused? Would you be angry? That all of a sudden your understanding of women not being able to attain enlightenment has been challenged? Your realization that everything that you had thought about women not being able to attain enlightenment is now invalid, that in fact women can attain enlightenment? How would that challenge you? What would your feelings be? And again, there's no right or wrong feelings. I believe that what is right or wrong is to ignore our feelings. This Lotus Sutra is written in such a way that I believe that it is meant to elicit feelings, to bring out feelings, to go beyond just an intellectual experience. So don't focus on the meaning. Absorb the words and note your feelings. Confusion, wonder, awe, mystery. All of these things are very valid experiences, very valid feelings. And if we do not take the time to notice them, then I think that we miss what the Buddha is trying to teach us. We focus instead on, it'd be like going to a presentation or a lecture and just paying attention to the enunciation of the speaker or the pace of the delivery, and not paying any attention to what the speaker is trying to convey. So you might make at this point observation. So some observations that I encourage you to explore are: who's involved? Who's there? Who is present at this particular event? The first part of the Lotus Sutra, everybody in the congregation is there. There's tens of thousands of people, and they are fantastical creatures, beings not from this world, not from this universe. Some of them are humanoid, some of them are not. So who's there? How did we get to this point in the story? As we pick up the beginning of the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha is in silent meditation, and then he comes out of his meditation at the occurrence of these various phenomena, the earthquaking, this beam of light that emits from his forehead. And these are not intellectual experiences. This is beyond our intellectual capacity to understand. And so just being present. So how did the Buddha get to this meditation state? What happened before that? What's the reason for him being in meditation? And we understand that because we know in the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings that was taught immediately before the Lotus Sutra, that the Buddha ended that sermon, that sutra, by going into meditation. And the Lotus Sutra is merely a continuation of that event. So what happened? In a particular story, say the Magic City, the parable of the Magic City. What's happening there? We've got a group of people who want to go someplace, and they don't know exactly how to get there, and they're worried about the obstacles that occur on their journey, and so they go looking for a guide. Imagine yourself when you try something new. What do you feel when you're just beginning a new endeavor? The uncertainty, the confusion, perhaps, the excitement. What's your participation in this event? If you're merely an intellectual observer, you're going to have a different experience with this sacred text than if you try to enter it with your life. And again, we're not eliminating, or we're not saying not to study intellectually. That has its importance too. But I think all too often we ignore a different way to approach the sutra. For those of you that have been reading my books, you know that I'm really big into how do we take this teaching and make it our own, make it something that looks like our life, or how do we make our life look like the sutra? Um, some of my work on the Magic City, I talk about this. How do we enter into the space of the different characters in the sutra, in the parable, the Magic City? How do we? How can we be one of the travelers? Have have we experienced that kind of situation in our lives? Have we begun a new journey, and have we needed to search out for a teacher who would be appropriate for what we need to accomplish? What are our experiences with that? Maybe we've had some bad experiences, and so it could be very frightening to all of a sudden have to rely on somebody else. Or maybe you've had some good experiences, and when you think about finding a teacher, you think about these good memories. So what would a traveler experience? What would a leader, a teacher experience? Putting yourself into that situation, into that position of being responsible for many other people. Maybe at times in your life, you have been called upon to teach someone, to guide someone, and that can be kind of scary too, because all of a sudden people are dependent upon you. Maybe as a parent, you've experienced this. In fact, if you're a parent, I'm sure you've experienced this many times. The fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that this person, your child, uh, is so dependent upon you. And everything you do matters in that person's life. Myself, I've not had children. However, I have an understanding, a basic understanding, if you will, of what it might be like to be a parent, be responsible for someone who is so utterly dependent upon you. So, who's there? Who's present? How did we get there? Where are we going in that story, in whatever section you've read? And again, some of these may not be applicable to every passage that we read, but I think that it's important to have a background understanding. What are some of the ideas expressed? So, this is a time for those of us who like to be intellectual about something. This is a time for us to exercise that intellectual itch, if you will, to scratch that intellectual itch. What are some of the ideas expressed? Um, if we think about the, the simile of herbs and flowers, plants and herbs rather. If we think about the simile of plants and herbs, we think we the idea expressed is an equality that is beyond capacity. That everybody is innately qualified to become a Buddha, regardless of what their skills are, what their capacity is. I mean, I have certain skills and certain talents that I've developed and tried to work on, and they may be entirely different from your own. However, that is not what determines whether or not we can manifest our innate Buddhahood. We all have an equal potential, regardless of our capacity. So, in the particular passage that you've read, what are some of the results? We talk about when in chapter 2, the Buddha begins to talk about this idea of equality, this idea that all people are capable of attaining enlightenment, that we no longer focus on the two vehicles, but the single Buddha vehicle. And all of a sudden, 500 people just get up and leave because they cannot handle this idea of this expansiveness of the potential of Buddhahood. So we have 500 people getting up and leave. That's important to know about. Um, in chapter 10, we have the Buddha talking about this one of these transition moments that I like to point out in the Lotus Sutra, where he says that We're no longer worshiping the relics of the Buddha. That the sutra then becomes the relic of the Buddha, and it's the sutra that we revere, the teaching, the Dharma that we revere. So we have a transition moment from honoring the person to honoring the teaching. And of course, in the Nirvana Sutra, the Buddha further illuminates that by saying, follow the teaching, not the teacher. So, what are the results of the particular passage? And I'm trying to cover many little different parts of the sutra to illustrate how each of the sections or each story in the Lotus Sutra can be thought of from a different perspective. And I've not talked very much about doctrine. I've not talked very much about philosophy, but just place yourself as deeply into that as you possibly can. In my book on the Magic City, I approach it from a perspective of Lectio Divina. So, what is maybe this isn't the most appropriate use of words, but I'm kind of fascinated by this idea of Lectio Divina, where it's a divine lecture, a divine teaching. Do we open ourselves up to this divine message, to this sacred message, if you will? Do we open ourselves up to it, or do we only reside in the intellectual observer and intellectual interpreter of this sacred message, this divine lecture? That's the Magic City. In the parable of the physician and his sick children, I'm approaching it more from a lectio oratio, or what is heard, what is being told to me, and what will my response be? I'm beginning work on the burning house, and this one I'm approaching interestingly. I'm approaching this on the sacred observation, the lectio visio, sacred observation. So, what do I see in this? And as it turns out, I'm exploring this somewhat artistically, although certainly not museum quality by any means. Certainly not from a skilled artistic standpoint, but just kind of dabbling with some of the images that come to my mind as I read through this parable, the burning house. Who's talking? Who's listening? What perspective are you viewing this from? As I mentioned in the Magic City, I explore different people. I explore the guide. I explore the people traveling. I try to look around as that person, insert myself into that person's life, and look around and think about what I might be feeling, to look at what I might be seeing, to think of examples of that in my own life. In the Magic City book, I talk about, we set out on a journey every day when we go to work. And yeah, we know how to get there, and we have an idea of what we might experience along the way. But do we take the time to notice? Do we take the time to actually pay attention to what we're seeing? Or are we so absorbed in getting to our destination that we miss the journey along the way? Frequently when I'm driving into work in the morning, the sunrise is reflected off the buildings downtown, off the windows of the buildings downtown. It's very dramatic, very beautiful. And if I'm distracted, I may not notice that. Or the other day on my way in, it was moonset, and beautiful, huge moon right above the horizon, a bright orange, even in the morning sun. It just really glowed. And they were special moments. They are special moments, and ones that even 2 weeks later I still remember. So I encourage you to place yourself in as many of the positions So who's speaking? Who's listening? Who's there? Um, who's asking questions? That could be important to understand who is asking the question, because the Buddha is going to respond differently to the different questioners, to the different speakers. So what, and then, what might be the purpose of this particular teaching or of this particular portion of the Lotus Sutra? What can we discern any uh, reasons why the Buddha or the writer, if it's another sacred text, why that person felt it was important to share that? What lessons can we learn from the particular portion of what was the motivation of the speaker? And, if we think about the Lotus Sutra and we just step back from it for a moment and think about all the parables and how visual they are, and why would that be? Why would it be so descriptive of scenery and things going on? I mean, page after page after page of descriptions of the event, not an explanation of the event, but a description of it. Why would that be? Why would this sacred text be written in such a way that it is short on teaching and long on describing? And I think that this is another indication that really we should approach the Lotus Sutra from a more heart-centered than a brain-centered way. Why all this detailed description? If we think about this stupa that appears above the earth, all the banners and railings, and all of that is described. Why? Why is that important? When we think about the greater, I guess you could say, the greater message of Buddhism, of attaining enlightenment, why spend so much time describing this object that appears in the sky? What doctrinal purpose does talking about the number of banners have? What doctrinal purpose does talking about the number of rooms in this great stupa? What purpose does that serve? And I think that one of the purposes is just to lighten up our life, if you will, to generate an excitement, to help us go beyond a mere intellectual understanding. How are things accomplished? How did this begin? How does it presented? What was the cause, if you will? What was the motivating factor for this particular section of the sutra that you're reading? And then, how was it done? We can detect slight differences. If we set aside our intellectual need to understand something and just absorb how it is presented in the Lotus Sutra, we can detect slight variances in how things are described, in where things occur, which is an indicator that there may be different authors, different people wrote different things at different times. If you step back from the Lotus Sutra, you can begin to see that some of the chapters don't work. They don't belong there. And scholars have over the years determined that indeed some chapters just don't belong where they presently occur. And in some translations, those chapters are even missing. So we have a sacred text here that has potentially multiple authors, although it is the words of the Buddha. But different authors, different ways of approaching things. Are we open to that? And then what does that do for us? Does that challenge your faith? How easy or difficult is it for you to sit with the idea that this document that is supposedly a teaching of the Buddha was in fact written by many different people? You think about the Lotus Sutra and the stuff that's in it, and And the merchant class is very important in many of the parables, a merchant class of some kind or another. We've got travelers going to a destination, large group of travelers, not an insignificant number, but a large group of travelers. And this is not something that would have occurred actually in the lifetime of the Buddha. Travel was extremely difficult and very limited. We have, in the rich man and his poor son, we have a merchant who's made a large sum of money, who's increased his wealth significantly over his lifetime through trading. This wasn't the situation at the time of the Buddha. There wasn't an emerging and growing merchant class. But as time went on and as travel became better and roads improved, we then have the emerging merchant class. And this is a worldwide phenomenon. Of course, it happened at different times in different stages, but there was a beginning as trade and travel became more accessible or more easier to engage in. The merchant class began to emerge and become more powerful. And so the environment, the culture looked different. So we can, kind of place the time frame of the Lotus Sutra at a much later date than the lifetime of the Buddha. Is that challenging to you? Or are you all right with that? Or have you made peace with it and it's not something that you dwell on? And yet it is a fact. It is part of our understanding of the Lotus Sutra that we can say that the Lotus Sutra is a teaching of the Buddha, and yet are not the exact words necessarily of the Buddha. So there are different. It's a different view of the world when the Lotus Sutra was written from what the Buddha would have had in his own lifetime. The Lotus Sutra is estimated written maybe about 500 years after the lifetime of the Buddha. Certainly not the words of the Buddha, not the exact words, but probably pretty close, because the time of the Buddha, the sutra was transferred by oral tradition. And so we have the gathas, which are very song-like, very poem-like, easy to understand, easy to remember. So much of the Lotus Sutra may be close to what the Buddha said. However, it's probably altered, as oral traditions tend to do, to make them more appropriate to the audience. So while the message may not change, the circumstances or the surrounding events might be placed in a different time frame. And so whether or not the merchant class was powerful or important during the lifetime of the Buddha really doesn't matter too much to the teaching that is the underlying teaching of that particular portion of the sutra. But it is important to understand that sometimes, in fact many times, we can change the circumstances of the teaching and look at it from our own culturally, historically appropriate perspective and still have the same message. So whether we're talking about people walking on foot to get to their journey, to their destination in the Magic City, or whether we're talking about our own unique situations in life where we've had to set out on a new experience, had to maybe learn something new, a change of career, or maybe even a child being born in your life unexpectedly. And that is the beginning of a new journey. And gosh darn, what do we do with that? How do we handle those situations? What is our pattern of behavior when those things occur to us? Do we stop and think about that? And do we stop and wonder, how might I change? How might I do it differently? And what are the experiences of the travelers in the Magic City? They were encouraged and kept motivated by the appearance of this illusionary city where they could rest. And when you're beginning a new endeavor, do you open yourself up to the little victories along the way? Or do you only focus on the small failures or the setbacks in your accomplishments? You know, are you open and receptive to the many little things that you do that are right, that are successful? How do you experience your life? And I believe that the Lotus Sutra is inviting us to go beyond the actual words written and begin to experience it deeply within our lives and to place ourselves in those circumstances, or to look at our own life from the perspective of those stories in the Lotus Sutra. I'm getting a little emotional here. So, are there keywords? What are some of the words that we may run across? I encourage you to keep a list, perhaps, as you're reading. Just write down any word that you do not understand, or any word that feels important. Just a single word is good, or two at the most, perhaps. Just keeping it short. And then when you're done reading it and you've read it through maybe once or twice, then go look up the words. Try not to interrupt your reading by looking for the words, because interestingly enough, a lot of times you can get a sense of what the word meant if you just open yourself up to the feeling or the experience of the passage that you're reading. And then you can verify it or fine tune it, if you will, by looking up the definition and then going, aha, yes, I understand. I was close, not spot on, but I was close. I had a pretty good understanding as it was. And what would be a memorable word that you read in that phrase? What would be a word that you could take away from that and would be a trigger to help you re-experience this story that you've read, this section of the sutra? And interestingly enough, I think that you could just randomly open up the sutra at any place and find and just pick several lines on a page and have some pretty good material to work with. And it might be interesting for you to do that sometime. You just randomly open up the text, and I'm sure that many of you do. I've heard experiences from people that they do just open up the text and put their finger down and just begin reading and um, look for a message. I visited a patient in the hospital once who he had some psychological problems, and by his own claim, he practiced bibliomancy. Now, he did it to his own self harm, but the idea of bibliomancy is to get a prediction by randomly finding a place in a text. It could be the Bible. In his case, it was the Bible, or it could be any other book. You just open it up, put your finger down, and read, and there will be a hidden message there for you. I'm not quite 100% behind that idea necessarily, because I think that one of the capacities of the human mind is to create a meaning out of almost anything that we experience if we choose to. In this particular young kid's case, he used that as a prediction or a message to cut off his hand. Uh, Very troubled young man. It was also a patient visit that said, well, obviously it stuck with me because it's probably about 5 or 6 years ago. It just really, stuck with me, the conversation that I had with this young man, and how he had misused this idea of bibliomancy. All right, so keywords. What would be a good word that you could think about, that you could write down, maybe in the margin of the book? Maybe you could keep a little journal of your studying from the heart experience. What's a keyword? And today it might be different from something you might use tomorrow. And that's okay because you're at a different point in your own life. What images are in the passage? What comes to you visually? What do you see when you read this passage? Do you see colors? I'm a very visual person. Visual in the sense that I like to create my own images. I don't like going to movies. I don't like images given to me. I like to create my own from what I read. And I always find movies disappointing in the cinematography because that's not how I would portray it. And you know what? That's my right. That's I'm perfectly fine with that, and it's okay. I'm not dictating to other people what they should feel or experience or see or witness. Um, just encouraging people to honor their own observations, honor their own feelings, and realize that they may change, they may not. To me, Lord of the Rings was a fantastic presentation, uh, even more so than my own imagery. So sometimes the other person gets it right. So, what images are in the passage? What do you see? What are people wearing? They may be wearing suit and tie in your image. They may be carrying a briefcase. And those are perfectly valid images and also not necessarily accurate to that time. But you see, it doesn't really matter because what you see is your own experience, your own entry into this teaching. Aha, interpretation. We do, just because we're studying from the heart doesn't mean that we completely ignore our human need to understand. But I think that it has to be concurrent with or alongside with this opening up to the splendor of the teaching. Part of the Midrash tradition, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Midrash or not, but it is a Jewish practice of looking for what is not written in our sacred teaching. And I explore that in the Magic City. That there's a whole lot of stuff that's just not there. When you read it, it's like, man, this is missing a lot of things. How do we get there? That one question I asked before. How do we get there? Thinking about the Magic City, why are all of a sudden thousands of people just getting up and moving? Has that ever happened in the real world? And yes, it has. People flee their homes because of war. Currently we're in the Saudi Arabia or Syria. I'm sorry, Syria. We've got civil war going on there, and tens of thousands of people are fleeing their home and are refugees in camps. Many times throughout the history of mankind, people have had to leave their home and go someplace else. And frequently, if we think about the immigrants who crossed the border from Mexico, how they are taken advantage of by people who charge them large sums of money and then abandon them in the desert with no provisions, and many die. It's a very perilous journey. And what do we do with that? So the story of the Magic City is not so remote from us. It was written over 2,000 years ago, and yet it is very contemporary in many ways. If we allow ourselves to begin to look at it as a life story and not a story that's dependent upon a time and place. But it is all times and all places. When we have many treasures Buddha appearing in that stupa that hovers above the ground, this is a representation of the infinite past, that the past is contained in the present, and the present goes on into the future. And really, there's not a whole lot different because we humans are the actors and we don't change that much. All right, so interpretation. Write down some of the questions about what you don't understand. Write down some of the questions about what's not there. Begin to explore what is missing. And when we do that, I think we begin to understand that the story is our own story. Many times we have done this very thing that's talked about in a particular passage of the sutra. That we are indeed present in that teaching. And, we talk about how this is a living teaching, this is a living document, this is a living sacred text, that our challenge is to make it living. We have the capacity, and I think that we are called upon to move from this being a historical document to this being a living story of our own life. And when we can do that, then we become immediate disciples of the Buddha. We might envy those people who lived at the time of the Buddha and who were able to practice alongside the Buddha. We might be envious of their position to be present with the Buddha. And yet, when we study from our heart, we open ourselves up to the opportunity to actually be present with the Buddha, to be the Lotus Sutra, to be living it in this moment. So it's not a historical document. It's the story of our current contemporary life. The stage setting has changed, yes. The props are no longer identical, but the storyline never changes. All right, what do you think this passage meant to the people listening? Place yourself in that moment. We talk about the stupa arising and appearing above the ground. We talk in the sutra. We're talking about thousands, tens of thousands of bodhisattvas emerging from the ground. What do you think you would feel? What do you think your experiences would be if that happens? And since that happens every day, do you take the time to notice those events in your life when something emerges from the ground of your life? This golden, radiant Buddha appears from your ground. Do you take the time to notice those moments when you do manifest enlightenment in your life? So what did it mean to them? What does it mean to you? And is there a difference? Not right or wrong, just a difference. Do you think that you are so different from the original audience? Or do you see yourself very similar to those people in the original audience? The Buddha addresses his contemporary disciples differently than those bodhisattvas who emerged from the ground. I always point out one of the things that really strikes a chord in me, and just something that resonates deeply in my heart, and something that I always think about, was all of the contemporary disciples approached the Buddha and they asked him for something. They asked him for predictions of their future enlightenment. They asked him about their own enlightenment. When the bodhisattvas appear from beneath the ground, the first thing they ask the Buddha is, how are you feeling? Are you tired? Is it difficult to teach? What a difference. What a difference. The bodhisattvas of the ground, from underground, are not going to the Buddha and saying, gimme, gimme, gimme. The bodhisattvas from beneath the ground are going to the Buddha and, in gratitude, asking about him. When we have gratitude, when we have this graciousness, this expansiveness in our life, that I'm grateful for so many things. And do I take the time to not only appreciate them, but do I take the time to open myself up to the experiences of other people? When we can have that expansiveness in our life, that I'm okay, and I have the capacity to think about, to be concerned about the other person. You know, opening ourselves up and understanding and realizing that we are pretty good usually if we take the time to notice. And when we take the time to notice, then we create space in our own life to notice other people too. And not notice other people from the sense of jealousy or comparison, but just opening ourselves up to the other person. You know, I frequently talk about the 10 worlds. Often it's taught as a doctrinal teaching, as as a philosophical teaching, if you will. And yet I believe that it is not just that. It is also a roadmap, a GPS, if you will, for becoming happy. If we are in hell, if we are experiencing greed or hunger or anger, and we don't want to experience that anymore, we want to change, what do? Well, we can look at the 10 worlds and say, I'm down here or I'm in this position and I'd like to be over there. And what does over there look like? What does over there? What does the realm of meditation look like? What does the realm of humanity look like? The quickest way to eliminate suffering in your own life, the shortest path out of hell or hunger or anger or greed, the quickest exit to those realms is to just think about someone else. And it's not a comparison of, oh, I don't have it so bad because look how bad they have it. No, it's just an awareness that there are others in your environment. And maybe there's not a lot of compassion at first. In fact, in the realm of humanity, it's just more of an awareness, a recognition that, you know what, they think their life sucks too. And I think my life sucks. And maybe that's as far as it gets. But all of a sudden, your focus has shifted from only yourself to at least an awareness that there are others in this world. And then what do we do with that? How do we move beyond just a simple awareness to creating space for compassion or empathy? How do we expand our life? How do we build up our internal reservoir of compassion and of joy? Oh, it's thunder. Maybe it'll rain. Oh, I love rain. Yes, rain's exciting. All right. And, the simile of herbs. I like that story because it rains in that story. It's all about rain. And you think about, this is a good example. You think about rain. For us here in most of America, not all of America, because, like when I lived in San Diego, I always say there was 2 seasons. They are 3 days of rain and then the rest of the year. Here in North Carolina, where I am, we have pretty distinct 4 seasons. They're not as dramatic as winter is certainly not as dramatic as I would wish it to be, but at least we get rain. You think about that story in the context of India, all right, where most of the year is drought. How glorious rain would be, and then how potentially deadly it can be when the monsoons come. So rain to you may be different than rain to someone else. So what does it mean to you? What does it mean to them? There's many, many perspectives in this story of the Lotus Sutra. All right. Are there words you need to look up? Words you didn't understand in that list that you wrote down? And then if you were to sum up the section that you just read, and I've got a parentheses just hanging out there. Okay. So if you were to sum up what you just read, how would you do that in a sentence? If you were limited to, you think about Twitter, and Twitter, you're limited to what, 144 characters, and people are pretty clever at getting a very long message into a very succinct 144 characters. And it's not all about eliminating spacing. It's about the challenge of the minimal words. I read a story about there was one of these on. I don't participate in commercial media. Um, I don't have a TV and that kind of stuff, and I don't really do a lot of web stuff. But I did read a story about there was one awards show either last night or over the weekend, that the acceptance ceremony, you're limited to 5 words in your acceptance speech, and they talk about some of the clever uses of 5 words as you accept your award. And one of the award recipients um, used his 5 words by saying something to the effect that they should do that at the Oscars. So anyway, so what is the meaning of this chapter to you now? And then by keeping a journal, you can actually look at how things change for you. Your situation in life will affect your interpretation of what you just read. So it would be natural for it to change, and we would hope that it would. All right. Illustration. Oh, it is raining quite hard, it seems like. So illustration. Draw a picture, write a word picture, write a poem, write in a journal. In some way, illustrate the section and what images it brings to your mind. And this helps in making the story your own and easier to share with others. And I'm kind of going fast here because I want to get to my next slides. All right. It doesn't have to be a masterpiece. It just has to convey a message to you. And what do we have here? Well, it kind of looks, well, we got some stick figures, all right? No place in the Lotus Sutra does talk about stick figures, but that's the best I could do. And these are just some illustrations. This is a burning house, all right? It doesn't have any windows. Doesn't have a gate around it or a fence. And yet in the story, you talk about the fence and one gate. And, we've got the father yelling at the children inside who are playing, and oh, they're having such a wonderful time, and the flames are raging around them, and he says, come out, come out, I'll give you some carts. And so that's supposed to be a little cart down there. And he entices them out of the building with these carts. And what does that mean? Yes, we understand intellectually that is us in the burning house, and the Buddha is talking to us and encouraging us to exit the burning house, and he offers us the rewards of enlightenment. But how would you illustrate it? What images would you use to illustrate that? All right. As it just so happens, I'm preparing to write my next book, which will be on the parable of the burning house. This is the most famous of all Buddhist stories. Practically every Buddhist throughout the world knows about the burning house. Very famous. And it comes from the Lotus Sutra. So I'm beginning to explore and do preparatory work for writing this book on the burning house, and I'm approaching it from this perspective of lectio visio. And so, what images? The sacred seeing, the sacred vision, if you will. And I don't know why I came up with this, but it seemed appropriate that this burning house invites me personally, as I read it, to think about what this looks like, to conjure up all kinds of images. And so, I've been exploring, I've been kind of playing around. I'm not very far along, but, it's a process for me. It's a process I work through and see what I end up at the conclusion. And, so I've got the burning house, and I'm not working on this in any particular order necessarily, and what I'm doing with these is these are ink and watercolor and perhaps some other media along the way that I'll use, maybe some collage. Who knows? It'll just be whatever the spirit moves me, if you will, the sacred vision. And then what I'm doing is I'm posting them on Facebook as I draw them, and the first person that likes them on Facebook, I mail the picture to. So I don't have any permanent collection of these paintings, and so far, some of them have gone to England, various, various places in the United States, and that's part of I guess uh, my exploring of this is to share it with other people and see what reactions I got from them. I don't put any text on initially. I just paint and then put it on there on Facebook. Then I add the message afterwards. And we think about, and I'm just going to share with you some of my evolving process to writing this next book. Is we think about fire, and then fire burns, and think about burning. Burning is, one of the definitions of burn is to transform, to give off light. So we think about that. The fire and the burning, the parable of the burning house. Fire is truly destructive, and yet it transforms things. So, how do we use this parable of the burning house to transform our life? If we merely approach it from an intellectual endeavor, then we'll just look at, okay, there's a fire and I need to leave. But the story is much more than that. How do we transform this raging fire, this destructive fire, into something that looks different, is experienced differently? How do we change that? And I believe that we actually are called upon. In chapter 16, there's another reference to, we think of this world as a world of raging flames, and yet it is not. So there's fire, and yet there isn't fire. And I think that is kind of interesting thought to play around with, that on one hand we have destruction, and yet on the other hand we're called upon to transform, to change this destruction, to change our view of this destruction. So it's just part of my evolving process, in particular with this parable. And I'm very early on in the process, and who knows, it may change, but I thought I'd include these as examples of how I would illustrate this, and encourage you that it doesn't matter your skill level. I've taken art, and I've had stuff in museums, but I'm choosing to just kind of doodle, if you will. I've been reading some of what's her name, Barry. Anyway, she's a famous cartoonist, illustrator. She teaches a course on doodling and visual journaling, and I'm kind of using that as this exercise as kind of a visual journal, if you will, a lectio visio, a sacred vision. All right, here's a demon, one of the demons. There's a couple of ways I'm thinking about the burning house, and that is that we have the demons that are given to us in the description, and some of them I have no idea what they are. Okay, I don't even know that they're real, real in our plane of existence, but they are something to play around with. And so we have those demons, and we have our own personal demons. Each one of us, Linda Berry, that's her name. She wrote a book on 100 demons. So her challenge was she'd seen these illustrations done by a Zen Buddhist back in the, I think, 1600s, where the exercise for this teacher back in this Zen teacher gave was to draw out 100 demons, to explore your life and extract from your life 100 demons. I don't know that I'll necessarily do all 100, but I thought that as I'm working through this, that I would not only look at the demons that are given to us in the text of the Lotus Sutra, but open myself up to exploring my own personal demons. What are the demons that challenge my life? So I've got anger here, and this particular drawing is going to a lady in Oregon. And I didn't have any, as I said, I don't write the text on at first. I write the text on later. And this one, I talk about anger. It's a strong feeling of being upset. That's an understatement sometimes for me. It is more than a strong feeling of being upset. All right. So, I'm being honest with you. I have anger. We all have anger. It's it's one of the 10 worlds in Buddhist descriptive text or art. Uh, Anger is depicted as asura, which is a little speck of a demon, just a little minuscule dot, if you will. And yet, when anger is manifest, it expands to this humongous, overpowering demon. And we think about when we get angry, you kind of hunch your shoulders forward, maybe not as physically dramatic, but you certainly inflate yourself, if you will, in all honesty. When we're angry, we're superior to the person that we're angry with. We're not like the other person. We're better than the other person because we would never do that. And so we have this inflated ego. So anger's um, very big. Think about, when was the last time that you got angry at someone and you said, "Oh, I'm so mad at you"? No, we don't talk like that. Ah, we might yell, we might scream, we might become very physical. Um, so that's anger. So again, this isn't any masterpiece drawing or anything. This is just playing around with this anger. Anger to me is red, very red and very yellow. Um, and I didn't put any pupils in the eyes, but you know what? That's okay. It's just me. All right. It's got a long tail. I don't know what it's attached to, but it just seemed like it ought to have a tail. And so there, anger. All right. Now, another way to illustrate. Maybe you just don't feel like drawing stick figures. Um, I thought I had the Magic City on here, but anyway. So you do a word illustration. Just write down words. All right, fire. In this is the burning house. Fire. We have illusion. The illusion. The children have the illusion of safety, of joy. They have the illusion of happiness, and yet danger exists all around them. And ourselves, frequently, we have an illusion. Sometimes our illusion is that life sucks, and that becomes our only view of life. Sometimes our illusion is that our life is so terrible that there is no way out. And the fire has become so close to us that we feel the heat and we smell the smoke and we feel helpless. We feel incapable of putting out those raging fires. And that is an illusion as well. All right, run. I couldn't find any place to actually fit run in, so it's just kind of hanging out there. But and in a way, that might be kind of appropriate. That sometimes it isn't so much running as it is opening our eyes up to the illusion. And I do work in the a detox unit, and you know people often say that people who use drugs are running from pain, and I think that's a dismissive and very trite expression. I think it ignores a reality that many people face, and sometimes they are not so much running from pain as they are running towards excitement. Now, it kind of looks the same, and running towards excitement has a certain aspect of running from pain. But I think that when we reduce someone's experience to a trite and contrived expression, that we devalue and diminish their experiences. And for me, by opening it up to saying running towards excitement, it encourages me and it reminds me that it's a very complex story and it's not easily reduced to such a simple explanation. All right, safety. Where is safety? What is safety? For you today, what would be safe? If you think about your life 20 years ago, if you're over 20, What was safety then? Today, I'm in retirement, and for me, safety looks like a reasonable amount of financial stability, a um, a reasonable amount of financial ability to meet my expenses along the way in retirement when I'm not generating much new income. Safety to me today does not so much look like health as it may have 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. Uh, Safety to me today uh, looks dramatically different than safety to me 30 or 40 years ago. When I was 30 or 40 years ago, um, safety to me um, looked like my stable relationship with my partner. Safety to me looked like my ability to do my job very well. Safety to me looked like maintaining a professional skill level to such an extent that employers sought me out. Today, not so much. I'm not so much worried about learning new things as I am about deepening my understanding of the things that I already know. There's a very good book that I read several years ago called Aging to Saging, and it's about the transition from the phase of life where we're acquiring things to a phase of life to where we're extracting the wisdom of the experiences of our life, and that um, really seniors are devalued in this accumulated wisdom. And I don't know that I have tremendous amount of wisdom. However, I do think that I do understand things differently now than I did when I was younger. And part of what I feel my mission is to share that with other people. And so that's what I do when I'm writing. Also, when I'm writing, I'm exploring my own experiences for myself. I'm trying to understand more deeply what my awareness is or what my life has been. All right, kind of gotten off track there. So I wrote down, I don't know why I wrote down T across from safety. I must have had a reason. I don't know what it is today, and that's okay. It meant something to me then. This is drawn, this illustration, this little word drawing was done about 2 years ago. So already I have no idea what T meant. And that's all right. But it does get me to awaken. It gets me to awaken. And how might awaken be applicable? Well, just being aware that you know there are things going around me that I can either choose to flee from or I can transform. Uh, I can run away from pain and suffering, either my own or other people, or I can choose to awaken to to a different perspective, a different way of living. All right, true. What is true? What's true? Truth today, I believe, will be and can be different than truth tomorrow or truth 10 years from now. The truths of my life now are different than the truths that I thought were true 30, 40 years ago. My outlook on life, my understanding of life, my understanding of my own self has changed. It's different. I'm not saying it's better, it's just different, and it should be different. And there's no comparison of is it better, but it's just different, and that's good enough. Um, in my case, I do believe that it's been growth, but that doesn't mean that what I believed as true 30 or 40 years ago was indeed not true. It just means that I have changed. And my view and perspective on life and the world and my own life is changed, and there is a new truth. All right, teach. Teach. Yeah, that's what we all do with our lives, whether we know it or not. You know, um, I several years ago I wrote the first book I ever wrote, and that was the 35-day practice guide, and I continue to get letters from people. I mean, I just wrote this book. I wrote it for myself. I wrote it so that I don't have to answer the same question over and over again. I also wrote it so that when I do answer, I do it relatively the same. So it was kind of a selfish endeavor writing that 35-day practice guide. I just wanted to get it out there and in a sense be done with that question. And it served its purpose. However, for me, it has been an interesting experience because I've received letters and emails from so many people all across, well, from different parts of the world, mostly in America, but different parts of the world who have found it very encouraging. People have told me it's what they needed. Um, I had no idea that was going to happen. Okay, be perfectly honest. There's two prisons in Texas that use that book as a guide or a model for their Buddhist inmates. Well, I would have never imagined that. It's more than I could imagine. So, reality when I wrote the book is different than reality some 4 years later. Um, you know, so everything changes, and sometimes it's for the good, and sometimes it's not. And even when it appears not to be for the good, we can make it good by learning from that experience and not denying it. Right? Spend a lot of time on illustration. All right, so application. Is there something for me, for you, to avoid doing? Is there a lesson in there that says um, maybe by doing such and such might not be uh, in our best interest? You know, think about the folks who are going to this journey, this destination, uh, and have to travel, a year and a half to get there. And how many times we've embarked on some endeavor and it's taken a long time and we get discouraged and maybe sometimes we quit and maybe sometimes we just want to quit. Is there something in there to a message about maybe what we should not do? Maybe we should reframe our questions sometimes. My supervisor asked me the other day, there's initiative, there's always some initiative going on. And I think that sometimes the more insecure people feel, especially administration, the more initiatives they initiate. But she came and asked me that she said there's a new thing going on in the hospital about how do we um, how do we help people become more compassionate? And I told her, I said, I think that's the wrong question. People are already compassionate. The nurses and doctors that I witness are, by and large, very compassionate. So if we're only looking at how can we make people more compassionate, then perhaps we're not looking at how compassionate they really are. And if we're not looking at how compassionate they are, then we're ignoring the opportunity to celebrate that compassion and to encourage it. If you're always asking the question of how can we make something better, frequently that leads to ignoring how good things are. So a lot of times we're not asking ourselves the right question, I think, and taking a moment to say, what message is there in there for me to avoid? Well, what is there something for me to claim? These people along the Magic City, on the journey to the Magic City, have traveled for a great deal of time and are darn right tired. They're probably very dirty too. I mean, you think about traveling for a year and a half it only took about 9 months to travel by wagon across the United States. And oh my gosh, can you think about how dirty you'd be? I don't like to be dirty, and I'm spoiled that way. And for me to live that way for so long would be just very depressing and very discouraging. I'm being honest with you here. All right. I would go crazy myself personally. Um, I in the military, I've done some mountain training and some desert training, and these kids that are in Iraq today and Afghanistan, um, just to be in all that heat and sweating all the time, and all the sand, and it's just, to me, it's yeah, I just can't imagine doing it. So, is there something for me to claim, either for myself, and it may not always be positive. I'm claiming my aversion to being dirty, uh, and that can be challenging. What would it be like if all of a sudden I had to be a refugee and carry away, take out of this house only the things that I could carry on my back? Is there a purpose there, that to think about what is really important in my possessions? Of all the stuff that I have, what would mean the most that I would carry it on my back out of here if I had to be a refugee? Is there an example for me to follow? Asking ourselves these kinds of questions. Sometimes asking ourselves these kinds of questions can be frightening. Sometimes it can be embarrassing. But I believe that we can learn something about ourselves by asking these questions of ourselves. And fundamentally, that's what Buddhism is all about. It's about being self aware and being open and willing to attempting to change. Enlightenment, people ask me, what is enlightenment? And one of my standard responses is there is no there. Enlightenment is not a destination. Enlightenment is a journey. Hopefully, by the time that this lecture is over, you will be more enlightened about a different way of studying than you were when you first began listening to this presentation. That's a form of enlightenment. Maybe that's a little e enlightenment, but it's the accumulation of many little e enlightenments that gets us to the capital E enlightenment. There is no shortcut in this journey. And so asking ourselves questions, being open to assessments of ourselves, being willing to say, you know what, uh, some of my life is maybe not all that great. Some of it is great. And how can I make it better? And again, I encourage you not to approach it from the perspective that you've been a failure or that you're not good enough. And frequently people want to go to that extreme, that when they look at a shortcoming, they feel they're a terrible person. And I hope that you do not do that. It's one of the reasons why I've been pointing out some of my own weaknesses, my own shortcomings, is that we all have them. They're a part of us. They're what makes us unique. It'd be kind of a boring world if everybody were perfect. Um, I know that one of my close friends may encourage her students to view this presentation. And, one of my, I guess, aversions to the concept of heaven is that, to me, it just seems like it'd be darn boring. Everybody perfect, nobody making mistakes. I mean, that's what makes us human. And, we're pretty good. I think by and large, we all want safety. We all want peace, security, provision, um, a shelter. We all pretty much want the same things. And, the teaching in Buddhism is that we all possess Buddhahood within ourselves. So I hope that you do not, as you look at your own life, I hope that you do not go down that path of despair, of discouragement. but be able to hold up at the same time and with equal value your accomplishments and things that you might have done different. Maybe there are things that you could not do differently. I guess if I were forced to live to be dirty all the time, if I were forced to do that, I could adapt. But I'm imagining right now that it would be a difficult struggle for me. Um, you know, it, let's talk about eating, okay? I've been accused of being a picky eater. I don't look at it so much that way as I do that I'm a spoiled eater. Uh, I grew up eating a certain food, and for most of my life, the food choices were limited. Um, you know, for those of you that are old enough, if you think back 30 or 40 years ago, there wasn't a lot of variety in food. It was very regional, very local. Now, we've got what cooking television or something. We've got shows on different recipes. We've got the internet that we can go searching for different recipes. Like I'm making tsukimono, which is Japanese pickles. I went on the internet and found recipes for that and instructions, and so I'm making that. I've been to Japan. I've lived in Japan, and so I have an appreciation for Japanese food, probably a greater appreciation for Japanese food than I do any other ethnic food. I'm spoiled. People, I've got one friend of mine, a rabbi friend, that we almost every week we meet for dinner, and he'll ask me, "Well, do you want to, go eat Indian?" No, I'm sorry, I do not want to go eat Indian food. It's not a taste that I have adapted to, and you know what? Is part of my spoiled sense of being is that I'm old enough, I don't have to, and I'm not motivated to. So that's what kind of a terrible person I am. That informs how I eat. I'm spoiled, and I admit it, and I'm okay with that. And you know what? If I have to change, if I'm forced to change, I will. But if I'm not forced to, I'm also don't feel self motivated to change. I'm comfortable where I am. Some people might look at that and say, well, that's pretty bad, or that's terrible. I'm okay with that too. That's their opinion. It's not their life. It's just their opinion, and I'm the one that has to live my life. And I'm 60. I'm over 65, and I've had to do things in my life, and you know what? I'm giving my space now to say, I'm not really not interested in changing right now. All right, so what do you know about yourself? What not just what knowledge you gained about the sutra, but what do you know about yourself? And are there things that you can pursue? Are there things that you might consider would be imperative to pursue? Maybe it's very important at this stage of your life to make a significant change. Maybe you're being forced to make a change. Maybe something has happened in your life, a radical occurrence that is forcing change upon you. And I encourage you in those moments to not look at that as failure, but as an opportunity to grow. All right, so what other knowledge, what other ways of interpreting things, what other ways of entering into this passage might be open to you? When you begin to open up to these different ways of spiritual practice, and a lot of my writing recently is exploring other spiritual practices and what lessons might we learn from them as well. We live in a multicultural society, and increasingly we are less uniquely cultured as we are multicultural. We have a greater sense of appreciation, a greater participation in cultures other than what might be considered American. Uh, I know myself, growing up in the South and then living in various places of the United States and in Japan, visiting England and France. I'm a limited traveler, but by doing so, I have an awareness that there are differences. There are differences in the way people react to things. You go to a temple in Japan and it doesn't look like the same as a temple here in America. The participants in the ceremonies and the services are not, well, the people are not as participatory. The Japanese are not very participatory in their religion sometimes. It looks to us that way. And yet, it's a different kind of participation. So when we open ourselves up to these differences without judgment, we can actually increase our own self. And that's what I'm trying to do with this introduction of various spiritual practices, these different approaches of spiritual uh, being. That there are things that we can learn. Sometimes one approach might not be appropriate at another time. As I shared with you, the idea of imagery, the idea of uh, illustration seems to be, for me personally, very appropriate as I'm exploring the parable of the burning house. And when I looked at the journey to the magic city, just to me, there was a whole lot of stuff not there, and I kind of wanted to explore what's not written. I can do that in any situation, but if we're not aware of these different practices, then I think that we deprive ourselves of different ways of being, different ways of understanding. All right. So application. How do we use what we just read? How do we use what we just explored? How do I use the story of the Magic City? Well, I use it differently now than before I began exploring using midrash or uh, lecto oratio, the divine message, the divine speaking. In my understanding of the parable of Magic City is, I think, much greater and much deeper, and certainly different than it was before. And that has influenced my understanding of, of other things in the Lotus Sutra. Now, when I read the Lotus Sutra, I actually employ a variety of techniques, both the midrash, lectio divina, where I place myself in the person, in the other person, in another person in the story, rather than just being an observer. I place myself as a participant in the story. And, the idea of illustration, I'm now bringing that into my personal practice. And I do believe that my personal practice is much different, much deeper, if you will, than before I began using some of these techniques. And I'm sharing them with you through these presentations and through my writings to open up a different possibility for yourself. Some of them may not work for you, and yet you may find that some are helpful. So I encourage you to explore the teachings, the sacred text, from other ways other than merely as an intellectual endeavor. All right, what's my next? Oops, sorry. Where was I? So I think we're done. Yes, that's the end of the slideshow. All right. So it is, we've been, I don't know how long now, but we've been an appropriate length of time, however long it was. Roughly a half hour, 45 minutes or so. And I have no participants in the lecture tonight. So I mainly did this lecture tonight to re-record a failed recording. I wanted to put this material out there for the public. So if you have any questions about anything that's presented in this, any observations, any personal experiences, I invite you to share them with me. You can always contact me at the temple's email address. That's temple@myoshoji.org. And I welcome those experiences. Maybe you try some of this and you have an experience and you'd like to share it. I really enjoyed hearing your experience of that. And if you need any clarification or questions, And I would like to close by encouraging you to keep a journal. Seriously, to keep a journal. Um, it's becoming more recognized, or recognized more widely, that keeping a journal has many, many benefits. If nothing else, at least keep a gratitude journal that where once a week, one day a week, you take a moment out to write down the things that you're grateful for in that moment. And from week to week, some of the things may be the same, and that's okay. Reminding yourself that there are many things in your life to be grateful for can help you in your practice, can help you in your life. If we don't write it down, we'll forget it. And I think that's truly so. Um, we forget the good things in our life because it's our natural human tendency to give greater importance to the bad things in our lives. I mean, pain. When you feel pain, that's where you're focused at. If you cut your finger, uh, all of a sudden your perspective changes and your world is framed by that cut in your finger. I know I've had various surgeries, and all of a sudden my life uh, is from a different perspective. It's from the perspective of avoiding pain. It's from the perspective of not making it hurt. It's from the perspective of how fast is this going to heal? How long will this take? When I had shoulder surgery, I was in physical therapy every day for 6 months. I just wanted the pain to quit. I wanted to get back to a reasonable normal. It took a long time. It still is troubling at times. And for that 6 months, my world really was from the perspective of pain. That's what I focused on most. That's how I interpreted life, was relative to pain. It's not that way now. But keeping a journal will help you have a different perspective on your life. It'll help you maybe reframe your view of your own circumstances. So I really strongly encourage you to keep a journal, a study journal. Myself, I just keep everything in the same journal. Whether or not you have 3 or 4 different journals is up to you, but I hope that you will seriously consider journaling and employing some of the things that I highlighted in this slide. So thank you for joining tonight. Let's close by chanting Odaimoku and 3 times. Namu Myo Renge Kyo. Namu Myo Renge Kyo. Namu Myo Renge Kyo. Thank you very much, and I wish you well.